Hello and welcome to the Tour de France podcast with humansevent.com. I'm Richard Moore and I'm joined this evening in Albi by Daniel Friebe and Lionel Birnie.
Which I think is a gymnasium that has seen slightly better days inside, hasn't it? We've been here before, of course. We're just on the outskirts of Albi, which is a reasonable sized town.
Very beautiful.
The centre is, yeah, but it's not so great out here.
More on Albi later though, about Albi.
More on Albi as in further information on Albi, or more as in Albi? That Richard Moore, everyone's waiting with bated breath for Richard Moore's verdict.
Not Moore on Albi, not Moore. Get your pronunciation right, please, Daniel. Not Moore on Albi.
Okay.
More Albi stories.
Okay.
Today's stage was from Montpellier to Albi, 205 kilometres. Some tough climbs, 4 categorised climb, one particularly hard category 2 climb at 94 kilometres, around about that distance. And it was a hard stage to predict this one. It was difficult to know what would happen. There were various views at the start village this morning. Daniel, what did you think would happen, and did it fulfil your expectations?
So far on this tour, pretty much every prediction I made has gone absolutely pear-shaped. So I just predict everything now. I predict a sprint, a solo win, a break, and just hope no one notices. But my initial instinct was actually a sprint. I didn't think the climbs were that hard. I'm not sure whether the weather has had an effect the last couple of days. I mean, yesterday guys were absolutely dripping with sweat, and it was another very hot day today. So, I mean, what was interesting was how long the sprinters teams, once Cavendish and Greipel had been dropped, how long they persevered in the chase. They weren't making a lot of ground, mainly because Cannondale were riding so well at the front.
We should explain what happened. That on the climb, Cannondale went to the front and absolutely drilled it. Their sprinter Peter Sagan is, he's not the fastest in the race, and he's gone very close and missed out the last couple of days, and so they knew that his best chance of winning was to get rid of the likes of Cavendish and Greipel and Kittel, and they drilled it on the front up that climb. And it wasn't perhaps that the climb was difficult, it was that they made it very hard. And by the summit, I believe Cavendish was 5 minutes down.
Yeah, I mean,
I read it on Cycling News' live coverage.
I think 5 minutes is overstating it a little bit. I don't know.
Well, they were certainly distanced by enough of a margin to make the chase a full-on one for Omega Pharma, Quickstep, and for Lotto Belisol, the teams of Cavendish and Greipel. And they worked incredibly hard, didn't they? They were on the front of that second group, collaborating really well together, trying to drag the two sprinters back up to the front, because they knew that as the later climbs came, the job would become even harder, because Cannondale's riders were well suited to setting a strong pace over climbs and on that terrain, and when the gap wasn't coming down to a sort of realistically closable margin, they took the sensible option and decided to call it a day, and Cannondale just carried on the front just to make sure, and planned it. They got it absolutely spot on, as I think Daniel tweeted earlier, because they did enough just to make sure that gap was never going to get closed. They then controlled the race to make sure nobody got away, and then they set up the sprint as well. It was a really impressive bit of riding by Cannondale.
It was a 105 kilometre lead out for Peter Sagan, effectively. How close did the sprinters group get to the front group?
I think they got just under 2 minutes at one point. It was, I think at one point there was about 30 seconds to the breakaway leaders at that point. Yeah, 2 minutes to Cavendish's group. And I think that the problem for them was always that the last climb, down off the second cat, Greipel, Cavendish, their teams came together. They made up some ground, but then they were always going to lose more again on the final third category climb, I think it was. And that's proved to be the point where they sort of desisted and resigned themselves to the fact they weren't going to get back.
Were you surprised to see Cannondale ride as well as they did? They've come in for a little bit of criticism perhaps, but they really took the initiative today, and it wasn't just the plan, which was very sound tactics but the execution was excellent, and even though they had a cushion on those chasers, it was still quite a big ask to hold off the might of those three teams combined.
Yeah, I mean, they've got a team here with not a lot of household names. They've got the likes of Brian Van Borg, Alan Marangoni. These are the kind of guys who did a fantastic job today. And Moreno Moser as well. Obviously, there was a lot of expectation about his first Tour de France. Hasn't had the opportunity yet to go in a break or really try anything for himself, but he was very strong in the chase as well. So, I mean, it was just very impressive that they had sort of obviously earmarked this stage, not only for a stage win, but this was a stage where they could really almost sew up the green jersey competition. And I think Sagan said afterwards they got more than they hoped for. They were hoping for maybe the intermediate sprint and the high finish at the end, but they took the jackpot really.
That's a good point about the green jersey, because I think I'd have to double check this, but I think Peter Sagan has now got more points in the green jersey competition than Cavendish amassed in last year's Tour. So it's going to be a real. I know there's those flat stages next week, and there's still Paris and all of that, but the way that Sagan rides, the way he's able to be competitive at the front end of the harder stages means that he's got more opportunities to pick up points. And although he's not as quick as Cavendish and Greipel in a straight line, as we said yesterday, he's enough to be second or third, and that's really what the green jersey is all about. It's about consistency day in, day out, and he's I think got that in the bag, barring disaster.
I mean, do you guys also feel? I feel that he's not really clicked out of fourth gear yet. I mean, I think that we'll see that such is his style and such is his ability that he won't. Once he has sewn up the green jersey competition, he won't just sit tight in the peloton. I think we'll see him on the attack in the mountain stages with multiple mountains, as he was last year. And I think he'll do that not purely to amass points in the green jersey competition, but simply because he can. And he could also take a stage win in a fairly lumpy stage or even a mountainous stage.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you sort of cover the Tour, everything just changes complexion day by day, doesn't it? Yesterday, as I was just saying about Sagan there, having sewn up the jersey today, yesterday it looked so exciting, so promising. People were predicting that it would stay together and it wouldn't split. And I think Cannondale looked at that and thought this is a really real opportunity to try something and put Greipel and Cavendish out of the green jersey competition, and they pulled it off brilliantly, really.
Greg Henderson made a point yesterday that a lot of these sprint finishes are now coming down to which team does the best job, and we can say that of the last three stages, that coming into Marseille, Cavendish won after his team did a magnificent job for him. Yesterday, easily the best job was done by Lotte Belisot, and today it was Cannondale. These are three victories that owe an awful lot to the team, don't they?
Yeah, and a fantastic lesson. If you were, for the uninitiated, fantastic example of why it is a team sport, particularly in the first week in the sprints. I know, Rich, this is a point that you've been pulled up on in the past by is it Jonathan Vaughters?
Yeah, he misunderstood the point I was making. I think it's a complicated question. This is a team sport. I mean, it is, of course, it's a team sport, but
certainly for the sprinters.
For the sprinters, yeah. I think the question was being asked an awful lot last year after Bradley Wiggins won the Tour. There were comparisons being made between him and, say, Andy Murray, the tennis player, and some saying, well, Andy Murray's achievement in the US Open was better than Bradley Wiggins because it's an individual sport. My argument was, yeah, cycling is a team sport, but the individual still has to win. The individual is still the most important cog in that machine.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it is a team sport for individuals. I mean, or an individual sport for teams, whichever way around you want to look at it. But without, I mean, you say certainly for the sprinters, and I'd agree with that, but also for the climbing stage, and I think we'll see in the Pyrenees coming up, Sky are going to demonstrate just how important a team is, and so will Saxo Bank as well. They will be there doing their utmost for Froome and for Contador, and that work that gets done, it cannot be underestimated, the importance of that.
Absolutely. However, I can only think of one example of a Grand Tour that has been won thanks to a team that a rider has won where you say, well, the contribution to the team. I think CSC in 2008 when Carlos Sastre won, I think they had 2 cards to play there, and it was a Sastre card that they played on Alpe d'Huez. I can't think of another example of a rider who's won the Tour as been an undeserving winner. I don't think that.
You're suggesting Sastre is an undeserving winner?
No, I'm not suggesting that at all. I'm saying that I don't think there's a winner that you can say, well, he only won because of his team. I don't think there are any examples of that. Even 1985, and
I'll go with that.
Have we got any interviews today, chaps, for the first part of this podcast?
You're supposed to segue.
Well, this is a kind of segue.
Seamlessly into it.
Okay, let's segue into it.
So we were talking about Quick Step, weren't we? We were talking about Cavendish. We were talking about his team.
Yeah.
And the team is also composed of backroom staff. One of the Omega Pharma's backroom staff is their doctor.
Yeah.
Still going rich. And
Brilliant.
over the past few days, obviously one of the themes of the first few days have been the after effects of that bus incident on the first day. Tony Martin's crash. He's been riding in a lot of pain. And this morning I spoke to Omega Pharma's doctor, Helge Riepenhoff, who most of the year is Brighton Football Club's doctor. But he comes and he works for that team on the tour. And he spoke to me about Martin's crash and the kind of pain he's been experiencing over the past few days. Helge, we saw Tony being taken away on a stretcher at the end of the first stage. There were even media reports that he'd already been sent in a helicopter home, and then the next day he appears at the start of the stage. Seemed unbelievable to us. Can you tell us what happened exactly from a medical perspective?
He crashed quite bad. It was a relatively fast part of the race, and with his head he hit the ground, back and his left side. He lost a lot of skin, and he had a very deep cut. And actually with a lot of soft tissue damage on his left upper arm. The reason why we had to bring him out of the stretcher was that he was consciousless in the bus, so he made it to the bus, it was good, and there finally wasn't able to stay awake anymore.
Right.
And obviously he was in a lot of pain because of his head and the big bruising on his arm and the major soft tissue damage.
So you give him painkillers then? Is that the first thing you do, or you attend to the wound, or does that have to be done in hospital?
No, in this situation you don't want to give them any painkillers because you still can't exclude fractures, so you try not to give them any food or drinks, just to make an operation possible as soon as you know the diagnosis, and also to reduce the risk, because if you had some food or anything actually before surgery, it's a high risk that you start vomiting and that you inhale this, and this would cause really major problems. Right. So you just try to get everything ready, clean, have a first look at everything, or what is actually the major problem. Yeah. Try to stabilize him if you have to give medication, and that's why we had to ask the tour doctor, because of the no-needle policy, we had to ask them to be there when we do this, because that's not a clinical environment, but it's an emergency situation. Okay. And the race doctor agreed to this, and that's why we were able to give him quite soon IV painkillers. Right. Just to leave the option for us to do surgery as soon as we're in the hospital. Right. Okay. So he got to the hospital, no fractures. Yeah, we did. I mean, we did. The normal trauma procedure. We did a full body scan with the CT. They were very helpful there. They screened the head, that was my major concern, and the lungs, because he has quite a big bruising on his backside. Right. So after excluding the fractures, Tony was getting a little bit better and realized where he was, and started to remember the crash as well, and then he started straight away to start discussing with me if he can start racing the next day. And what was your opinion? I have a very clear procedure there. There's a trauma score for head injuries. Yeah. If he's all right with this, or if he scores enough points, it's exactly the same one the Formula 1 uses. Right. Then he's clear for the race. We do another test. It's a blood test. We check on a protein. Its name is protein S100B. It's also high when you have major brain damage, or when you have brain damage. that was normal. So these two things are important for me to let him ride.
Yeah.
The big problem is obviously the lung and the bruising there, but this was more related to his performance.
Yeah.
But he made it through the race, so we were happy about this. The soft tissue damage on his left arm, which is really big, and it goes down to the muscle. So all the skin and subcutaneous fat is gone.
Yeah.
This is more risk from the second week on, because then there's a high chance that it's getting infected because the immune system is working less during the tour, and this is then the challenge for the next days.
I know it's difficult to gauge, but how much pain do you think he was in, the first day he was riding? I mean, it must have been pretty close to the threshold of what is humanly bearable.
Yeah, he was definitely there, and I'm sure not many riders are able to do this.
Yeah.
The good thing is cyclists are used to pain. They deal with pain every day. Lactic acid is very painful when it's high in your body. Tony, it's really, his nickname is Panzer, like a tank, and he really showed that it's hard to beat him, He was very strong, and it must be horrible to ride with this. If you look at him now, you still know or see that it's, a lot of skin is gone, and it's really painful.
Finally, Helga, we often hear that when riders have a bad crash and have terrible cuts, their body kind of goes into a shock mode and they produce more adrenaline, is that right? And this is one of the things that makes dealing with crashes very hard on something like the Tour.
They produce actually adrenaline, of course, and endorphins, so this is the reason why they have less pain, but also Tony needs painkillers to get through this. Of course, we follow the WADA rules, so nothing illegal, but without painkillers the first 2 days he wouldn't be able to get through it.
This is a humansinvent.com Tour de France podcast with Richard Moore, Daniel Friebe and Lionel Birnie.
That stokes up lots of memories, good and bad and bizarre, I think. Lionel, would you like to reminisce a little bit about Albi?
Yeah, it kind of all came up when I looked in the road book today and noticed with a bit of a wry smile that the Belkin team has been billeted this evening in the Campanile Hotel. The Belkin team
much maligned Campanile Hotel.
The much maligned Campanile Hotel. The reason it's amusing is because the Campanile Hotel, well, it certainly was in 2007. I don't know whether it is now because I haven't seen it today, but it's next to a blood transfusion centre. I remember a photographer got a great shot of the Rabobank and Astana team.
Who were staying there in 2007?
They were staying at the Campanile Hotel, Astana and Rabobank. And there was a shot to be had of all the team vehicles in the foreground and the blood transfusion centre in the background. And that picture became all the more prescient when Alexander Vinokurov of the Astana team failed a...
Well, he won the time trial in Albi, didn't
right,
he?
Yeah.
And he was bare. I mean, how he was able to walk, I don't know. He was bandaged up. He was like a mummy. He'd had some horrific crashes that first week. He was worse than Tony Martin.
He was. He crashed in the first week and he'd soldiered on. And
it's only a flesh wound.
I was standing in the car park when both the Rabobank and Astana team cars arrived. First of all, Rabobank came back with Michael Rasmussen in the yellow jersey, and the Rabobank car couldn't have parked up closer to the doors of the hotel. Rasmussen was such a reluctant leader of that race. There was just something weird about, and this was of course before all, the whereabouts lie where he had been caught out telling the anti-doping authorities porky pies about where he'd been. That story was rumbling away in the background, and he just looked like...
In fact, we heard about that in Montpellier, where we were last night. I remember we were having dinner, Daniel.
I was chiding William Fotheringham.
We got a phone call, we got a phone call telling us that the Danish Federation had, out of the blue, announced that Michael Rasmussen, who at the time was leading the tour, had been ejected from the team or banned from competing for Denmark at the World Championships that year. This came out of the blue. We didn't know why.
I think I knocked over a carafe of wine, didn't I?
You did. You knocked over a carafe of red wine. You did. Brilliant memory. Brilliant memory.
So Rasmussen got out of the car and walked about 3 paces into the hotel, and about 10 minutes later the Astana car turned up, and Vinokurov got out and he swung his legs out sort of almost robotically. In sort of unison, and sort of got out of the car like like an old man, really, and he hobbled across the car park to a sort of ripple of applause from the crowd that was waiting to sort of see the Star Riders, and it just he looked like a sort of cartoon villain that evening, and he you know, logic would have said that the car would drop him off as close to the door as the Rabobank car dropped off Rasmussen, but for pure theatre and whatever we think of Vinokurov, you could never say he wasn't almost a sort of theatrical baddie. But he walked sort of 150, 200 yards across the car park, all the while with the blood transfusion centre in the background for any photographers who were there.
Yeah.
And it was on the rest day.
The relevance of the blood transfusion centre is that it later transpired that he had taken a blood transfusion.
To be fair, he probably did need a blood transfusion after all that he lost in those crashes.
Yeah,
but
to go back,
did he not have a therapeutic exemption for a blood
to go back to the time trial, he won that time trial miraculously ahead of Andrei Kashechkin, Andreas Kloden, Cadell Evans and Bradley Wiggins.
That's right.
And Rasmussen did an absolute stonker of a time trial. He finished about 11th.
He did.
Yeah.
Kashechkin and Kloden were both in Astana as well, weren't they?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So there were three teammates in the top 5, and it later transpired that Vinokurov had taken a blood transfusion. One of the things I remember about that time trial is also that Vinokurov's father was there, and when it did come out that he'd failed a test for a blood transfusion, which his teammate Kashechkin, who I think was second that day, also later failed a test for a blood transfusion. Vinokurov said there was a rumour at the time that the blood transfusion had come from his father, and that's why he tested positive. I think when Kashechkin was then busted, was there not a theory that perhaps they'd mixed up their blood bags and that he'd taken Kashechkin's blood and Kashechkin had taken Vinokurov's blood? However, on the day, at the time, the rumour was that Vino had taken some blood from his father, and Vinokurov's reaction to that was, impossible. If I'd taken the blood transfusion from my father, I would have tested positive for vodka.
There was an awful lot of intrigue, wasn't there, around that positive test? I remember talk of unmarked vans arriving at the Astana team hotel on the morning.
Lionel.
I think on the morning of the time trial, Vino jumping in and jumping out 40 minutes later, and there were all sorts of theories about that was where the blood transfusion had taken place.
But I always think, looking in the road book to see that the Belkin team are staying in that Campanile, and the Belkin team is, of course, the old Rabobank team. Rabobank pulled their sponsorship largely due to the fallout, the prolonged fallout of doping, and particularly the Rasmussen affair. So I sometimes wonder whether the tour organisers are having a little joke to themselves by
putting them back in that hotel.
Just reminding anyone who, I'm not sure how many people involved in the Belkin team would have been around in 2007. There must be a few, but it always strikes me as quite amusing, because I think Astana were then posted back to the Hotel Palmarai in Po, which is where, of course, it all blew up when Vinokurov tested positive for his blood transfusion and the police turned up and all the rest of it. And I think a couple of years after 2007, it might have been the next visit to Po, but Astana found themselves back in the same hotel again. So I sometimes wonder whether Prudhomme or whoever it is who books the hotels has got a bit of a twisted sense of humour.
Yeah, Po, of course, was where I think it emerged that Vinokurov tested positive during David Miller's press conference.
That's right.
That was an eventful day, because at lunchtime there had been the Rasmussen press conference with the lawyer for the Rabobank team, a very awkward affair. Rasmussen not doing a very convincing job of assuring everybody of his innocence. We thought that the main story that day was going to be Rasmussen.
You, Richard.
Not me.
We were not.
When I say we, I mean myself and my then travelling companions, Brendan Gallagher of the Telegraph and William Fotheringham of the Guardian, and we went and covered the Rasmussen press conference, wrote our pieces for the next day's paper, then decided to treat ourselves to a spa at our nice hotel on the outskirts of Po. We were mincing about, as you might say, Daniel, in toweled gowns, in white toweled gowns, having a massage and stuff, and it was very pleasant, very relaxing, the sound of crashing waves and birds singing. And out we walked together, the three of us, relaxed, and turned on our phones, and they all started bleeping at once with the news that Vino had tested positive.
Just finally, an awful lot happened that day. I remember, not to be I think we've perhaps been a bit self-indulgent here, but I also remember that day Ivan Basso phoned me up because he'd phoned Stephen Farron, another of our colleagues who was working for Cycling Weekly at the time, and he wanted to talk to Stephen about the hate campaign that he was leading against him. He'd got Stephen and I mixed up, and Steve had given him my number, and he called me up, and we had a half-hour conversation about Operación Puerto and why the likes of Ivan weren't welcome anymore at the Tour. And but I
remember that. Yeah. Did that not lead to a feature that you did?
It led to a clandestine meeting the following autumn, I think.
You're listening to the Tour de France podcast with humansinvent.com and Sharp.
We will be a week into the race tomorrow, and we've got a couple of days in the Pyrenees coming up. Obviously this is where we see the big guns come forward, and we expect to see the likes of Chris Froome, Alberto Contador, Cadel Evans at the front. Lionel, what are your thoughts ahead of the mountains?
Well, I think with the first stage, which goes over the Pyrenees and then up to Aix-Trois-Domaines, I think that is the one that's likely to be the sort of the first testing ground that we're likely to see the fast pace of Sky. They will, I'm sure, assume leadership of the bunch. They'll try and make the pace fast on the first climb, and then faster on the second climb, and then I think it will all be down to how fresh Froome and Port are feeling. I've got a feeling that Port won't be called upon to actually do a turn on the front tomorrow. I think Sky will have plenty of riders to do the legwork and then leave Froome to pick his moment, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if he is the first serious aggressor and wants to try and put Contador on the back foot. But then, having said that, Contador may be having exactly the same thoughts, and so it could be a sort of bit of a game of chicken as to who makes that first move. But I can't really see too much happening until inside the final 3, possibly 2.5 kilometres, because that's the place where, particularly after a fast pace on a summit finish climb, that's where everybody is on the limit, and it's where you can do a lot of damage in a relatively short space of time. And that's actually something I spoke to Dave Brailsford about this morning, and he had some quite interesting observations on that. But I started by asking him how he thought the stage to Albi today would pan out, and with Edvald Boasson-Hagen second overall this morning, I wondered whether he might end the day in the yellow jersey if Impey was one of the sprinters dropped on the climbs. And it's quite interesting now that we've watched the stage to listen to how Dave thought it was going to pan out.
I'm with Dave Brailsford in the start village at Montpellier. Dave, how would you sum up the first week of the Tour de France as it draws to a close?
So far so good, really. The only challenge I think that we've had is Geraint's crash and his injury, and nursing him through that, and trying to figure out what it's going to, what impact it's going to have. Because obviously Geraint at full strength is a massively valuable team member. So I think that's been the major cause of concern. But apart from that, all good.
How is Geraint doing? He was on the front, putting in some big turns. He was visible again yesterday. You would assume with a cracked bone in his pelvis that he would try to maybe keep out of the spotlight a little bit and protect himself, but he doesn't look like he's doing that at all.
No, and that's not in the nature of the rider, really. And I think his injury is getting better, and certainly the medical advice is that it should keep getting better day by day, and hopefully then by the second, third week he's back to full fitness. But he's still managing to contribute, so rather than maybe waiting and riding later in the stage as he normally would, we kind of switched it around, so he's contributing earlier in the stage and saving another rider for later in the stage. So we're managing it that way around for the time being, and so far so good.
How do you see today panning out? Because it's possible, depending on how Daryl Impey climbs, that Edvald Boasson-Hagen could be in the yellow jersey tonight.
No, I don't think so. I think a lot of teams will look at it and think, right, this is an opportunity for a break. And certainly I think Green Edge will want to keep the jersey, but so they'll be quite happy for it. There's a lot of lads now who've lost quite a lot of time, so the right break to go, it could go all the way. I still think the sprint teams might keep a little eye on it and think there's an opportunity depending on how the first half of the race, first 100k of the race goes, because you can't descend all the way down from that 94k. It could be that Peter Sagan tries to lighter up the on the climb, too far out, I think. So I actually think it'll be a break or a relatively controlled day.
And looking forward to tomorrow's first mountain stage, on paper I would compare Axe Trois Domaines to Planche de Belfi last year. It's quite a similar length climb, it's got quite similar sort of changes of gradient in it. That must augur well for Chris Froome, because he looks like he's got through the first week in almost serene form.
Yeah, certainly he's in good shape. There's no denying that, and I think you are absolutely right. It's not a monster, Alpine, Pyrenean mountaintop finish. It's a hard climb. It's demanding. It's got a 700 metre section in the middle, which is particularly steeper, as it were, than the rest, which could provide a platform, I think, for all the climbers. They'll be looking at that and thinking, right, that's the moment to go. But I think from our point of view is that both Chris and Richie are really, really looking forward to it. They just can't wait to get there. So from our perspective, I think we take a lot of confidence from them in that with that mentality really.
Should we expect the action to start earlier on the climb, or would we? The recent trend is for the explosive riding to take place in the last couple of kilometres, really, when the opportunity to turn the screw, you can gain a surprising amount of time in quite a short space of time.
As the fatigue levels get higher, when you go, as it were, so the potential gains in time are actually greater, albeit in a shorter space of time. I would imagine, the first mountaintop finish tomorrow, everybody's going to kind of be sort of seeing where everybody else is. I think it will be aggressive. I think, some of the racing this year has been more aggressive. And, I think our tactics as well, we've got some ideas about how we're going to ride this year, and I'm sure that we'll be as aggressive as most.
This is the humansinvent.com Tour de France podcast, powered by Sharp.
So Dave Brailsford there telling us a little bit about the strategy that we expect from Team Sky tomorrow. Axe Trois Domaines, it's not the hardest climb. I remember in 2010, Andy Schleck and Alberto Contador shadow boxing up there.
They pretty much stopped. In fact, I think Andy Schleck's career stopped on Axe Trois Domaines.
The winner of that tour, you mean? He would go on to be declared the winner by default when Contador tested positive. It was also at the summit of Axe Trois Domaines where Bradley Wiggins finally came out and said that his tour had gone very badly. We'd known this already, but it was he really kind of opened up to the problems that he'd been having there. So we know it well. Daniel, what are your thoughts about tomorrow?
It looks ominous for Sky's rivals. We heard Daryl Impey tonight say that his friend Chris Froome, he thought that Chris would definitely win the Tour. If you look at the results today, and also something I've noticed over the past few days, Vasil Kirienka came in with the second group today, the back group, and so did David Lopez. Now, that's not, I'm sure, absolutely convinced that's not because they were dropped and didn't have the power in their legs to go with the front group. That's because they're saving themselves for tomorrow, and those will be two key guys, and they will be part of the train that leads Chris Froome, I'm sure, very hard from the bottom of that climb, because it's a short climb, and they will try to do a lot of damage, I would imagine, in the first 4-5 kilometres. And I don't expect it to be particularly good to watch. I think Sky will control it from I think they'll probably control it throughout the ascent of the Porte de Paillere, and then on the final climb as well.
The thing is, I think you're probably right. And the reason for that is because it's not in anyone else's interest to try and wrestle control of the peloton from Sky, and it will be hard at that pace for anyone to get away and maintain an effort. So it's a real conundrum for every other team in the race. I mean, what do they do to try and profit from what Sky are doing? Because that's the only option they've got left. They can't upset the apple cart to the extent that Sky fall apart. I wouldn't have thought. So what do they do?
Well, I think it's going to be remarkably similar to last year when Planche de Belfi was also on the Saturday, and then the next day was the stage that Thibaut Pinot won, and it wasn't billed as a high mountain stage. It was a stage in the Jura, wasn't it? But it was hard. In fact, I think it was the hardest stage of the tour. And Sky were put on the back foot quite a lot of that stage by Jurgen van den Broek, who had lost time the previous day and had little to lose, and he was very, very aggressive. And it could be that Sunday is quite exciting if there's a similar kind of rider who is has lost a bit of time, perhaps he's fallen or whatever, and he's got very little to lose. And a rider like that could make the stage at least interesting.
Yeah, I mean, if I was Alberto Contador or Joaquin Rodriguez or Thibaut Pinot, I would forget about tomorrow. I would. You've got to stay as close as possible to Chris Froome. If you lose 30 seconds, you lose 10 seconds, that's okay. I think if Chris Froome is going to lose this Tour, it's going to be through something going wrong. It's going to be through an unexpected dip in his form, or it's going to be on stages like Sunday stage and like the stage to Le Grand Bornand in the Alps with descents, multiple ascents, where the issue is really complicated by someone going off early, a teammate of one of the main contenders going off early and really sort of scrambling the Sky radar, really.
Daniel, you've been tweeting about the Colombian rider with Movistar, Nairo Quintana, and he's only 25 seconds down. He's the sort of rider who perhaps could cause mayhem if he felt like it. With particularly at the moment, while he hasn't lost any ground at all, really.
Yeah.
Do you see him going on the attack, trying to do something on either of the Pyrenean stages?
I mean, two things about Quintana. Last year, he wasn't at the Tour, but I spoke to a few people at the Tour last year, even within his own team, who were not confident that he would be able to ride a Tour de France and get to the bottom of the mountains in good shape. And the other issue is, okay, he's 25 seconds behind, and that looks very good on paper, but he's crashed a few times, and the toll of these fast, I say flat, it's all relative, they haven't been that flat stages, but that does take a toll on a climber particularly, and he might not have his best climbing legs tomorrow, but certainly, and the other factor, Lionel, is that he, on paper at least, is supposed to be subordinate to Alejandro Valverde, who is the nominal captain of Movistar. I personally think that Quintana would be a better climber, but it will be very interesting. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how a lot of young riders fare tomorrow. I mean, I'm very intrigued to see how Pinot fares. Francis Dijeux are taking his overall chances very, very seriously. Marc Madiot has banned him from attacking.
We haven't seen them in any breaks or anything either, have we?
No,
not really.
That's very true. And they have
normally in previous tours, especially recent years, they've been the most aggressive team in the race.
Yeah, and so Pinot's been banned from attacking before Mont Ventoux, and Marc Madiot's master plan is for Pinot to get to the bottom of Mont Ventoux 3 minutes down, no more than 3 minutes down. He'll have done one time trial by then and presumably have lost a fair bit of
3
time.
minutes.
3 minutes. But if that were to happen, he'd be in great shape to finish very high up. I think they're aiming for a top 5, which is already quite ambitious, but who knows, he could go even better than that.
I mean, entering the mountains is bound to raise the spectre of asking questions about people's performances. One thing we want to get onto, and it's been raised a little bit today, is this analysis of power data. I'm really keen to speak to Tim Kerrison about this, Team Sky's coach, because there is an awful lot of data being flung around in connection to the team time trial the other day as well by Sandro Donati, a very respected Italian anti-doping fighter since the 1980s, actually a former athletics coach, and he's been a very important voice in the anti-doping fight. But as soon as I saw that some kind of analysis had been done from estimated figures relating to power output at the team time trial, my eyebrows kind of raised to the ceiling, because I just don't. The calculations for individual riders on climbs are tricky enough. I don't see how you can arrive at any realistic figure for power data in a team time trial, a team event. I just don't see how that can be possible.
I've spoken about the workload in team time trials to Tim Kerrison in the past, and one of the things that people may not realise when you watch it is the benefit the riders are getting the further down the line of 9 they are. So there's an awful lot of recovery being enjoyed by the riders at the back in 9th and 8th and 7th position, and it becomes a little bit harder as they move towards the front of the line, and of course they're putting out more power at the front when it's their turn to break the wind. But to me, in that sort of, it's kind of back of a beer mat calculation. A lot of these calculations are based on guesstimates of all manner of things,
of lots of variables.
So riders' weights, the weights of the bikes, okay, that may well be pretty standardised, but riders' weights, wind direction and speed,
which changes by the second.
The speed of the riders changes by the second. The gradient on the road. By the time, if you've got
the surface of
the road, if you've got a plus or minus tolerance of even just 0.5% on it, or each of those factors, suddenly you're wildly out. And I think that it's the kind of thing that very interesting studies could be done using, by scientists using, computer modelling. But it would have to be done over such a, there'd have to be such a huge sample of results and conditions taken into account to come up with anything meaningful. But the problem is that you end up with these stories breaking, and they are used then as a stick to
the headline
beat people
with the team time trials that Orica Greenedge produced the fastest ever team time trial. And I get frustrated a little bit by the focus on speed in road racing and in cycling. I was doing a radio interview the other night with a mainstream radio channel who were very focused on this world record speed. It's not really how cycling is measured and gauged, and I suspect that Donati's attention was drawn to this performance by the fact that it was such a fast speed. But it's kind of irrelevant, isn't it?
And also Donati should look closely at the results and realise that there were effectively 100 riders, because there were around 10 teams within 40 seconds of our. Is he suggesting that 100 riders are doping? And the headline, like you say, Rich, well, there were various lines that were easy to sort of sound bites in there. It was a worrying performance by Orica Greenedge, very much pointing the finger at one team, and also utter nonsense in that piece about technology. He was asked whether technology has surely evolved, hasn't it, in the last few years? That's surely one reason why it's so fast. And he said, well, technology has been at the it's been at the top now. It's been as far as it could go for several years. Well, in that case, Sky, Greenedge, BMC, etc., they're wasting their money going. They're spending millions a year. Certainly, Sky are. On bikes, on skin suits, etc. Well, it's all a waste of time, and it's not giving them any benefit at all, which we all know that's complete rubbish.
We will definitely return to this topic, and as I say, I'm keen to get speak to a few of the sciencey type people involved with the teams, I think, and just get their opinion on this whole area of data analysis, because it will be, I'm sure, a hot topic as we enter the mountains and the overall contenders emerge. So I think we'll wrap it up tonight. Do we have a competition tonight? We've got a reminder that you can win a phone call from David Miller by tweeting #TourMoment with your favourite tour moment. The winner will be given a phone call, called at a time that suits you, I guess, by David Miller on Monday, which will be good. Inertia Prize. Daniel, any nominations?
Comes to me in a minute. I like your T-shirt, by the way, Rich.
Peddler Santa Monica Track Club T-shirt. Yep. The Peddler de Charme. Any nominations today? I'd like to nominate Arthur Vichot. The French Champions jersey always looks great, especially at the Tour. There's something about that. I think it goes back to '78 when Eno was riding in it as a Tour debutant, and he was he took on the role of patron then because he was the French champion. That was almost as respect to the jersey at the Tour as the yellow jersey.
I'm going to go for, on that topic, Peddler de Charme, I'm going to go for Blaise Cadry. He looks rotten on a bike, but at least he'll look better tomorrow than Pierre Rolland, providing he doesn't wear those bloody polka dots.
Oh yeah, he's the new king of the mountains.
That has spared us, because that skin suit. It looks like a skin suit. It's not a skin suit.
I was punching the air when I heard that Rolland had lost the king of the mountains. And Inertia. Lionel, you got any nominations for Inertia?
I don't really get the Inertia Prize. I mean,
no one does, Lionel. That's the joy of it.
Right. I would say then that the guy in front of me at the buffet, the press buffet, he was taking ages deciding
which chocolate brownie to have.
Chocolate brownie to have, and it was almost like, I felt I couldn't quite get past him on the left or the right, and it was very frustrating because I had things to get on with. So
there's a whole, the French have a whole sprint train that they organise every day to get to the buffet. Yeah, 2 kilometres from the buffet, they start to get into line and winding it up.
I don't think.
I think I'm going to do a Cannondale tomorrow and start that sprint train nice and early. Anyway, let's leave it at that. So no inertia nominations apart from your random bloke. Yeah, well, let's have one rider as an inertia nominee. I think you want to nominate Mark Cavendish.
No, we should actually, on a serious note, we should actually mention Christian van der Velde.
We should. Certainly not for inertia. but a very sad end to his final tour when he was forced to pull out.
I understand he's been quite ambiguous on that in the last couple of days.
Okay.
But God, what a terrible series of crashes in major tours he's had.
Well, not just this tour. I mean, he crashed for a second time today, but the guy, just throughout his career, really, since that fourth was in 2008,
and it is due to a loss of confidence.
Well, you did a very interesting interview with him about that.
I tried to, and he didn't.
He didn't want to speak about it.
No, because it was a very sensitive topic.
Yeah, because that is very interesting, isn't it? And in relation to, we were talking about Bradley Wiggins at the Giro and his loss of confidence, how that can become a real problem in a rider's career.
Do you think this is like the yips in golf, Daniel?
Absolutely.
Is that what it is? It's kind of just when a rider's something comes unhooked in the brain, and what has previously been natural suddenly becomes something that's being thought about.
It's just a self-consciousness kicks in, and certain things that I think anyway, things that used to be automatic.
But the yips are slightly different, no? Because it's the pressure to perform. And it's in this one sort of intense moment, whereas a loss of confidence on a bike is slightly different.
Not really. I mean,
is it not? Basically, the loss of confidence is a fear of falling. The yips is not a fear of physical pain. I don't think
it's a fear of missing, though, isn't it?
I don't think that.
Not to get it out of proportion, golf. I mean, ridiculous sport, but.
Hang on.
I think maybe certainly with sort of Bradley Wiggins, you do wonder whether he thought, look, I've done this, and
I think it's more basic than that. I think it's the fear of falling off and hurting yourself.
No, I disagree with that.
I'm going to have to disagree with you.
Well, we can talk about this again. We'll revisit this in the months, but just finally, Rich, don't underestimate the pain of missing a 2-foot putt.
Don't underestimate the pain of falling off your bike.